Hello, everyone, and welcome. We will be starting in roughly 2 minutes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We will be starting in roughly 1 minute. Okay, hello, everyone. I'm going to get started. Thank you for joining us today for Verra's third stakeholder webinar of 2024. My name is Scott Greenberg, and I'm Verra's Senior Director of Marketing. I will be emceeing today, filling in for our Chief Communications Officer, Hillary Navarro, who is out on parental leave. Hillary, you better not be watching, but if you are, we all hope you're having an incredible time with your beautiful child, and we cannot wait to have you back soon. I'll be making sure we stay on time and on track during this hour-long webinar. As a reminder, we will host these stakeholder update webinars quarterly throughout 2024. The final 2024 update is slated for the end of October. Registration is now open for all sessions at verra.org/events. If you register and you are not able to attend, you will automatically be sent the recording after the webinar concludes. On the agenda today, our President and Interim CEO, Judith Simon, will be kicking things off with a few brief announcements. She'll then give a quick update regarding the commitments made under the New Era for Verra initiative and the status of those commitments. After that, we're going to do a deep dive into our work with respect to our new carbon capture and storage methodology, CCP label pathways, and our work surrounding RED. To close, we'll open the floor to participant questions and answers, and we will answer as many questions as possible in the time allotted. Starting now, feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom console. And with that, I will hand the floor over to Judith. Welcome, Judith.
Well, thank you, Scott, and hello, everyone. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm Judith Simon, and I'm excited to be here with you today for this third stakeholder update of 2024. And I just want to thank you all for joining and spending time with us. This has been a really busy quarter, and we're excited to take a moment to share some of the great work our team has been working on. First of all, I want to introduce you to our new Chief Financial Officer, Anil Vinayak. With over 20 years of experience in diverse sectors, including international nonprofits, startups, and public companies, Anil brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the team. His strategic leadership and financial acumen is just going to be so invaluable for us as we plan for significant future growth, and also as we want to develop a robust infrastructure to support new financial capabilities. We are so thrilled to have Anil on our team. And then also we wanted to spend this time to remind you that we have our second annual stakeholder survey out. This was distributed on July 15th. It was also included in our July newsletter. Last year was our first stakeholder survey, and your feedback was so invaluable for us and fundamental in helping us understand how we can best support you moving forward. So if you haven't already, I strongly encourage you to take the time to complete this year's survey and provide us an updated view on your experiences. I promise we're going to read every response. And now a glimpse back into our new era for Verra. So this has been our set of focus priorities since September of last year that we've been anchoring our commitments to. The first is around operational excellence, and this is how we are investing and developing the capabilities needed for infrastructure to deliver excellence. The next is our program impact and scientific integrity. So this is how we are leveraging the best science and best practices to enhance our program integrity and scale up climate action. And third is around accountability, and that is upholding our duty to others, the stakeholders, the market, people, and the planet. So under those priorities, we made commitments last September, and we've been updating you since. So I just want to highlight some notable developments since we've started this. You've seen these before. We've talked about them before, so I'm not going to go into great detail. Just wanted to highlight a few of the more significant ones. The first is around our SLAs. We published SLAs for the first time to increase transparency around project review process, and we've been making a lot of progress in decreasing the gap between our commitments and our actual performance. On our last webinar, we launched and shared with you our new dedicated stakeholder support team. And so this team is responsible for quickly responding to project-specific and program-related questions. We also had our auditing and accreditation team share last April our new performance monitoring program for the VVBs. And then our work continues on our multi-year digitalization initiative to invest in technology to significantly increase transparency and efficiency and really help us scale up our operations. In Q1, we tested and refined our new digital project submission tool, which is kind of the next big development in our multi-year initiative. And we are nearing a phased launch of this tool. Under our pillar of accountability, we are moving forward with the relaunch of our Sustainable Development Advisory Group, and that will support our efforts to integrate sustainable development across all of our standards programs. And we expect to hold the first meeting with this group in September of this year. We are stepping up our work in plastics. In May of this year, Verra attended the ICN4 in Ottawa as an observer, and we were engaged in the treaty negotiations to highlight that the plastic waste reduction program is a critical component, and because it provides a framework to mobilize finance for plastic waste collection and recycling activities. We also published a comprehensive stakeholder feedback on the first draft of the Nature Framework. And so this feedback comes from public consultation. It comes from consultations to engage with and learn from Indigenous peoples and local communities. And we've had pilot projects testing the framework. And finally, we have continued to enhance our work with governments, particularly those in developing countries, to help support their work in meeting their NDCs. As we look at this last quarter, I want to reinforce some of the strategic investments we're making and then highlight some of the more recent initiatives. First of all, we have increased our staff, expanding our capacity and bringing in new skills and expertise to help us expand on areas like stakeholder support and also our continued investment in delivering the best-in-class standard and methodology development. In May, the U.S. government issued a joint policy endorsement recognizing the potential of voluntary carbon markets. That same month, the ICVCM approved Verra's landmark VCS program, which was a significant and exciting milestone for our organization. June brought further achievements with the first ICVCM CCP labels, and they became active on our Verra registry. And then later that month, we released the carbon capture and storage methodology, VM49, with the first batch of CCS modules coming soon. We're going to hear a little bit more about that later. In July, institutions in both Malaysia and Mongolia signed MOUs with Verra, bringing the total number of global jurisdictions and institutions endorsing and working with Verra via MOUs to 25, which is a 20% increase year over year. We've also developed the new Abacus label for VCUs in partnership with the Amazon-led working group. This high integrity label has been endorsed by Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, and Meta as part of the new Symbiosis Coalition. These companies have collectively committed to contract up to 20 million in nature-based carbon removal credits, which is very exciting. And this commitment is by 2030. And what they are focused on is to ensure that there's high certainty of impact on the climate and result in equitable outcomes for these communities whose livelihoods depend on these really important projects. Excitingly, the Abacus label is going to launch very soon, and we're very excited about that. So more information will be available on our homepage of this website. These accomplishments reflect our ongoing commitment to driving progress and innovation in the voluntary carbon market. But alongside these partnerships and progressions, we've also been actively working internally on some major initiatives. And so I want to highlight a few of those as well. We are developing a comprehensive playbook with Gold Standard in Singapore to assist countries in the VCM to meet their NDCs. And we have established programs with jurisdictions and institutions to support their pathways to Paris Agreement goals. To continue to strengthen the landscape of standards, methodologies, modules, and tools, we are currently undertaking a major revision to the improved agricultural land management methodology, VM42, with the possibility of introducing a new baseline approach that can accommodate flexible crop rotations. We will also be launching a new Verra-led improved cook stoves methodology, which includes several updates and changes that we believe are really meaningful because they reflect the current best practices of project design and implementation in distributed thermal energy generation. It also incorporates streamlined monitoring approaches, such as direct measurement techniques, and most notably, it covers a broad set of activities and consolidates elements of existing methodologies that are currently approved for use in the VCM, so VCS programs. So we're pulling those together as one methodology. We remain committed and focused on the continued development of our Scope 3 standard program, which will certify value chain interventions and issue units for use in companies' emissions accounting. And we are in the throes of developing our first ever nature framework. Mentioned that a little bit earlier about the new advisory group. This nature framework will enable projects to quantify their positive biodiversity outcomes. So let me say that again, I got tongue-tied. So it will help projects quantify the positive impacts on biodiversity outcomes, which is really exciting. The nature framework will help scale investment in nature conservation and restoration. And we continue to actively work on the VCS version 5 program, and we're focused there on enhancing the usability of the program, the transparency, and obviously the integrity, which is first and foremost. And we're going to be consulting soon on the initial round of those updates. So that brings us to the 3 updates we wanted to talk about today. So we got a lot of really positive feedback in the last one webinar where you really appreciated a deep dive in a couple of topics. And the ones we picked today we think are also really meaningful and important to share. The first one is the one I mentioned earlier, that we have launched a novel new carbon capture and storage methodology. And so you're going to hear from Ian on that. We have tailored a new procedure for projects to partake in an optional pathway for ICVCM CCP labeling, which we know is really important. And Justin's going to share that. And then in 2024 alone, we are investing several $1 million in a RED jurisdictional baseline data project to collect that data. And Naomi is going to share more about that. And so those are our 3 big topics today. We think they're really exciting. And so just appreciate you participating. Please fill out the survey, and thank you for being such a supportive community to Verra. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Scott.
Judith, thank you so much for that update. We really do appreciate that. As a quick housekeeping measure for everyone, I will remind you that you can type your questions into the Q&A at any time. and we will get to those at the end during our Q&A session slated for the last 15 minutes of this call. For our first deep dive of the day, I will hand the floor over to Ian Kuwahara. He is the Director of Energy and Industrial Innovation, and he's going to share more about our latest carbon capture and storage methodology, VM49. Ian?
Great, thanks, Scott. So VM49 is the carbon capture and storage, or CCS, framework methodology. We recently released it. It was on June 27th, just this year, 2024. So I'm going to describe today what it is and why I think it's important and what more we're planning in the CCS space. So at a high level, our mission is to set the world's leading standards for climate action and sustainable development. This commitment, when applied to CCS, means we are endeavoring to accelerate gigaton levels of action globally. This resolution includes the need to drastically reduce carbon emissions while also removing existing CO2 from the atmosphere. CCS represents one of the most promising technological solutions for both reducing and removing atmospheric CO2. In our early assessments, we identified that large collaborative hubs will likely emerge as a central use case for CCS. These hubs can efficiently pool resources, share infrastructure, reduce risk for proponents, and thereby maximize the impact of these carbon capture initiatives. So our framework methodology is geared towards encouraging these CCS hubs. Secondly, we understood that tech-based removals markets must scale by several orders of magnitude. The removal technologies involved in CCS, so namely direct air capture, or DAC, and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, or BECCS, are complex, costly, and still in early days of deployment. Scaling these technologies requires not only financial investment, but also stable and mature carbon market mechanisms like the VCS, since these removal activities are bespoke and dedicated, and that is to say, they don't generate other revenues the way many other crediting project types do. So to address these challenges, we envisioned a framework methodology as opposed to just a normal, simple methodology, so that it could evolve alongside growing ambitions and growing projects. Our goal was to create the highest integrity, flexible, adaptive framework possible. It accommodates a variety of technologies and ensures that as new innovations or new capture points emerge, they can be integrated into existing CCS hubs and even existing registered VCS projects. Since 2021, Verra has been collaborating with the CCS Plus initiative. It's an independent, member-driven initiative dedicated to advancing CCS in carbon markets. This collaboration has been instrumental in developing the framework methodology that we released. The CCS Plus initiative is a testament to the power of collective action. Currently, it has 48 member companies. It has global representation from multiple sectors spanning tech startups, small, medium enterprises, and multinationals. By bringing together diverse stakeholders, we're able to pool our knowledge and resources to resolve challenging but important accounting issues for the voluntary market. The VM49 framework will include various modules and tools that address the entire CCS value chain, as well as the broad number of potential emission sources and transport and storage types possible. So the development of these modules and tools are arranged into work packages, and we're currently still in work package 1. I'll overview the planned timeline a little bit more in detail in the next slide. So first, I'll mention that our framework includes detailed requirements for site selection, monitoring, risk management to ensure integrity of storage sites, closure plans, and post-injection monitoring in 2 documents: the geological carbon storage requirements, or GCS requirements, and the GCS non-permanence risk tool, or GCS NPRT, just to make the maximum number of acronyms, both of which were released in 2022. So those, in addition to the just released VM49 methodology document, are the components of the framework that are currently available. Looking to the future, in Q3 of 2024, we'll release another set of modules. This will include the direct air capture DAC module. As the name implies, it captures CO2 directly from ambient air and is thus eligible for removals labels. This capture activity holds immense potential because it's not constrained geographically by having to be near point source emissions. This allows flexibility and widespread implementation. So the module will give quantification procedures for emissions associated with operating a DAC capture facility. The framework will also include modules for transporting CO2 via pipelines, trucks, rail, and ships in the transport module. Each mode of transport has its own set of challenges and advantages, and this module provides quantification procedures for the resulting emissions. And then finally, in this first batch, it's storage in saline aquifers or depleted oil and gas reservoirs. These are among the most promising storage options in the near term. There's many geological formations that have the capacity to safely contain large volumes of CO2, essentially indefinitely, and can be accessed with current technology very cost effectively in many regions around the globe. So this module will quantify the project emissions from these storage activities. Looking beyond this first batch, in Q4 of 2024, we'll expand our framework again to include some more modules and tools. The first module is bioenergy combustion, so BECCS. So this one specifically is looking at project emissions from combustion of biomass-fired heat and power plants and waste-to-energy facilities. It'll allow proponents to combine renewable energy production with carbon capture at new or existing facilities. The technology, of course, captures CO2 produced from biomass growth, creating carbon-negative energy sources, and is eligible for removals as well. The integration of BECCS into our framework will provide guidelines for traceability of biomass procurement to ensure only sustainable and renewable biomass procurement is credited. Next, there will be two tools. One is for differentiating removals and reductions. So large and complex CCS hubs or projects where mixed feedstocks are used, and both these situations can have the challenge to distinguish between carbon removals and emission reductions. So this tool will provide a standardized approach for differentiating the two and ensure clarity and consistency in reporting and verification. And then secondly, the tool for non-VCS CO2. So non-VCS CO2 is a term we're using to indicate CO2 that flows into or out of the VCS project boundary, but that isn't intended for VCS crediting. So the reason we're doing this and kind of elevating this issue is because it ensures, or maybe signals to project proponents, that we encourage connection of these types of activities in large CCS hubs because it is beneficial overall for the environment, even if they're not intending to participate in the VCS as a revenue mechanism. So it's an important flexibility approach that will encourage more hubs. So this tool addresses the complexities associated with accounting CO2 that's not part of the VCS, but does flow through some of the meters that are used in the monitoring and the accounting. As we move into 2025, our framework will continue to evolve with the inclusion of additional modules. So bioenergy from bioproducts, and this module will focus on capturing CO2 from ethanol production, and again, will be eligible for removal labels. There's also capture from industrial processes. This includes cement and steel production, acid gas removal from natural gas processing, and blue hydrogen production. And then finally, capture from fossil fuel-fired heat and power. And this is conventional applications like gas-fired power plants. Looking beyond these, we do have future plans for expanding the framework again, without necessarily a timeline associated with them at this point. And that includes utilization in materials or products. So a separate methodology here would be developed for incorporating CO2 into materials like cement and aggregates, and then storage through underground mineralization, where injection of CO2 in water that relies on solubility trapping and mineralization trapping instead of the conventional dense phase CO2 storage with physical trapping occurs. So this could be an important alternative in the future and potentially has better durability. So we look forward to those. There's potential for more additions beyond that, but that's all we'll go through today. So that's a quick overview of the work we're doing around VM49 and CCS. Thanks a lot, and back to you, Scott.
Ian, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for the comprehensive update regarding risk reduction, infrastructure sharing, and really the future scaling of our new CCS methodology. I'm now going to hand the floor over to Justin Wheeler, who is our Senior Director of VCS Program Development, and he's going to discuss our CCP label pathways in detail.
Thanks a lot, Scott. And welcome everybody. I'm just going to give a quick update on the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, or ICVCM, and what the VCS is doing for labels. So apologies in advance, there are a lot of acronyms here. We've tried to spell them out on the slides for you. So the ICVCM is an independent organization which has developed a set of core carbon principles. So these principles are basically a definition of high quality carbon projects, and Verra has worked with ICVCM in the development of those principles since the early days. Our former CEO even sat on their board. The ICVCM vision, the first part of the vision anyway, is build integrity and scale will follow. So Verra has supported that vision and endorsed it, and we've submitted the VCS program to the ICVCM for assessment under the CCP assessment framework. That submission was made in November last year, and in May, ICVCM reached a decision and approved the VCS program as fully aligning with the core carbon principles. In order to get a CCP label, a program has to meet two conditions. So both the program has to be approved, and then each category of methodologies have to be approved. The first decisions on categories were released in June of this year for landfill gas and ozone depleting substances, and that included approval of the first VCS program active methodologies. These are CDM methodologies that are active in the VCS program. And Verra went ahead and labeled the first batch of credits that met the criteria for those methodologies. So there's about 10 million credits that are active on the registry, well, active and retired, that you can view that have the CCP label designation. So we do expect further category decisions. There are many working groups and decisions that are underway. The ICVCM board meets approximately monthly, and then after each board meeting, the next set of decisions are announced. So stay tuned for those announcements to come through the coming months and potentially even into next year. So when Verra submitted the VCS program for assessment to the ICVCM last November, we committed to providing a pathway for existing projects to transition to approved methodologies where necessary to qualify for CCP labels. There might be two reasons for this. One is we withheld some of our older versions of methodologies or older methodologies where we, in our own assessment, knew that they wouldn't meet the CCP criteria. And then we also knew that the ICVCM, as it made decisions, would be excluding some versions of methodologies or putting conditions on methodologies for their approval. So on July 9th of this year, Verra released a draft of our methodology change and requantification procedure. So this is a new procedure to deliver on this commitment to allow projects to go back and demonstrate that they meet all the requirements of an updated methodology for a previous monitoring period. The consultation on this procedure is open until August 9th. It's available on the Verra website. And then we plan to review the feedback and fairly quickly finalize the procedure. So September or October of this year, we hope to release the final version of this procedure. One really important note off the top is this is fully optional. So VCUs that have been issued and are active on the registry are fully valid and can be used for claims in the market. They reflect the methodology and the program rules that were in force at the time of issuance. Those program rules and methodologies, of course, are updated over time as part of our regular continuous improvement process. That doesn't mean that the old credits are any less valid, though. So proponents have always been allowed, as we update our methodologies, proponents have always been allowed to switch through a project description deviation to a new methodology for its next crediting period. What's new about this procedure is we're now allowing and providing a specific procedure for project proponents to go back in time to previous monitoring reports, update those to the new methodology, and demonstrate that they fully meet the updated criteria. The procedure has two parts. So first, a proponent must confirm that they meet all of the requirements and that they have the data required to demonstrate that they meet the requirements. They then update their project description and emission reduction and removal calculations and submit that to a VVB to have those updates verified. Once the verification is complete, the proponent then submits the documents to Verra and pays the review fee, and then Verra reviews and confirms that the updated documents meet the requirements, that the project has demonstrated that it fully meets the new version or new methodology. Once we've completed our review and approved the request, Verra then notifies each VCU holder that they have the option to reconcile their VCUs. So reconciliation is a new term in this process, and this basically speaks to the option that each VCU holder has to update their VCUs to reflect the new calculations in the new methodology. So if there's a difference in the quantity of VCUs with the update to the new methodology, then each VCU holder has the option to reconcile to that difference. So for example, if the original submission had 100,000 VCUs eligible for issuance, and then once the project proponent does the update to a new version of the methodology, they then quantify that 90,000 VCUs could be issued, then each VCU holder that chooses to reconcile would cancel the 10% of their VCUs. The remaining VCUs are now fully valid under the new methodology, and then eligible for any labels associated with that new methodology. We're still finalizing the exact mechanics of the cancellation and specifically whether we would cancel all the credits and reissue a portion or just cancel the difference. So that's one of the things you can provide feedback on through the consultation. VCU holders that choose not to reconcile, so again, fully optional, their VCUs will not be affected in any way. So they remain valid and they've been issued under the original methodology. So we encourage everyone to please review the full draft on the Verra website of the procedure and the questions that we've asked. There's a Google form up there for collecting the feedback, and that's open till August 9th. There's also a recording of a webinar we did last week where we went into a little bit more depth on the procedure and the rationale behind some of the design decisions we made there. So thank you to everyone for your time. Happy to answer any questions at the end. Back to you, Scott.
Yeah, Justin, thank you for the thorough update. I'm now going to welcome Naomi Swickard, who will provide a critical and exciting update related to the new VM48 unplanned deforestation module, activity data allocation, and RED methodology updates. Naomi?
Thank you, Scott. If we can get the next slide. So I'll start with just a little bit of an overview. I think many of you on this call are probably somewhat familiar with our new RED methodology if you've listened to any of those webinars. But to give you a quick overview, the new VM48 RED methodology is really bringing together and combining the different methodologies that we had for RED previously. So making sure that there's one consolidated methodology. That includes an overall framework, and then within it, modules and tools for accounting. And we have, at the moment, only included unplanned deforestation in this methodology. I'll give some updates on what we have under development in a moment. But in terms of unplanned deforestation covered in BMD 55, we have essentially flipped the script in terms of how baselines are developed, in particular the activity data element of that. So projects are no longer in charge of collecting that based on a reference region, but rather we are compiling that at a jurisdictional level and allocating that then down to projects based on the local risk of deforestation. So what this ultimately does is help reduce the potential conflict of interest, but also really importantly, it makes sure that there is consistent carbon accounting across the jurisdiction and consistent with the approaches that governments are taking. So while there are a range of ideas that have been suggested in the market around shifts in RED accounting, we've taken this approach in BMD 55 to make sure that we are using methods that are consistent with national accounting. So essentially, we look at the activity data, so the estimated area of deforestation in the jurisdiction over the 10-year historical reference period. We use that to create forest cover benchmark maps at 3 different points in time. And then using that, we also develop deforestation risk maps. So it's a spatially explicit assessment of the risk of deforestation across the jurisdiction. And based on those levels of risk, we are allocating the the deforestation to pixels around the jurisdiction using that data. So that's a very high level overview of how VMD 55 works. And we have been hard at work on the development of that activity data and risk maps. So if we go to the next slide, I can give an overview of where we're at with the activity data process and some updates on the timeline. So we are making, as Judith mentioned, a multi-million-dollar investment to deliver this data. That includes not only the activity data, but also risk maps. It includes third-party review of both of those, as well as the project allocations. Those will be ready soon for the first phase of jurisdictions. That phase has included 6 states of Brazil, Cambodia, Colombia, Maindombe, and DRC, Guatemala, Kenya, Peru, Tanzania, and Zambia. You can find the full list on our website. We will also be adding very soon to that list on the website information around the phase 2 jurisdictions. So we have already contracted the activity data development, and it is underway for the remaining jurisdictions that we did an RFP for a few months ago. So well into the development of that activity data. And we will be posting updates on which countries and who is doing that work, et cetera, on our website very soon. So we will also be releasing the data by jurisdiction as it becomes available. And the process for projects to request the data is in VMD 55 if you look at Appendix 3. So if you want to know how to work through that, then please go ahead and check out VMD 55. This is going to be done through the Project Hub, so you will essentially put in a request for the data for the project area, and that can be done at the time that you need it for validation, or it can be done in an earlier standpoint. We recognize that this data is useful for the due diligence phase as well, so you can submit that request earlier. And where the data is available, it will be returned through that process. We will be posting more information on that soon, but the overall process is already outlined in Appendix 3. So just to say a little bit more about the timeline on this, the jurisdictional activity data for those first jurisdictions is already complete. So the actual deforestation rates and forest cover maps have already been delivered for those phase 1 jurisdictions. We are in the process of doing the risk mapping and review of that in order to get it ready for allocation. Our partners at Clark Labs are working through the risk mapping process. And as we're going through that, we have seen some issues arise that have led to some unforeseen challenges in terms of making sure that we are able to deliver the highest quality product. So we anticipate that some of those will be delivered in the next couple of months, and then releases will be made incrementally as the products become available. So we recognize that this data is urgently needed and highly anticipated, and we ask you to understand that this represents the first time Verra is doing this work end to end. So firm estimates on timeline are difficult. We recognize that that is challenging for many of you. Perhaps just to remind, this sort of end-to-end process involves service providers for the activity data collection, for the forest cover benchmark mapping, for expert reviews of both the activity data and the risk maps. And in total, that's essentially, 4 different contractors that may be involved in each jurisdiction. So there's a lot to coordinate. We are getting it done as quickly as possible, and we'll have that out to the market for the first 3 jurisdictions very soon. If we go to the next slide. So one of the other things that we will be posting soon is the fee to cover this. So again, we're making a huge upfront investment to deliver the data. We will be publishing an update to our fee schedule in coming weeks to include what we're calling the new PATA fee, so the Project Activity Data Allocation Fee. This will cover the cost of the activity development, the cost of the third-party reviews, risk map development, and allocation process. We are anticipating this will be on a per charge request plus a cost per hectare. So it will be paid on request of the data based on the size of the area. And we will also have available jurisdictional scale data. So if there is an interest, for example, in assessing projects across many projects in a particular area, for example, or if folks are looking to use that data for other purposes like reviewing the portfolio, it is possible to also secure jurisdictional scale data that will be available on request. So you can reach out to us directly if you're interested in that. And then finally, this data will actually be given to the host country governments directly without charge. The last bit for me, if we can go to the next slide, is related to updates to our methodologies. So we have two components coming soon. On VM48, and particularly on VM55, we will be updating that very soon. It will cover, well, there will be a public consultation for that released in August. And essentially what we're doing is making some minor changes to ensure that we are aligning with the ICVCM CCPs. And we are also incorporating updates for sustainable forest management activities that are happening within RED projects. So there's some additional rules. And that's the main part that we're consulting on in that update. At the same time, we are updating minor updates also to the JNR, the jurisdictional and nested RED framework, which is really about accounting and crediting at a jurisdictional scale, which can or not include nested activities. And with those are also updates to ensure that we are aligning with the ICVCM CCPs. So they will be fairly contained, just a few small components that are needed for CCP alignment. And we are still looking at some additional updates to JNR that will be developed throughout the rest of 2024 and probably released in early 2025. Back to you, Scott.
Naomi, thank you so much for the thorough explanation of all things RED. And thank you to Judith, Naomi, and Ian and Justin for all of your in-depth updates. You all ended 3 minutes early, so bravo. Just to sum up what we've heard in 4 key points today. First, Verra is making dramatic investments, not only in our own operations, but at the VCM at large. Secondly, our carbon capture and storage methodology was designed to reduce risk and maximize impact. Third, Verra is actively working to create clarity and detailed requantification and reconciliation procedures for CCP label pathways. And lastly, as Naomi, our RED methodology is backed by an advanced new module and a significant investment in activity data. With that, I'm now going to kick off the Q&A portion of the webinar. As a reminder, you can type your questions into the Q&A section located at the bottom of your screen. And then I have a few questions geared up here. The first one is going to go to Toby Jansen-Smith, who is our Program Development and Innovation Lead here at Verra. Toby, what is the position of Verra regarding permanence, especially considering that the A6.4 SB is taking about 100 years minimum permanence? And secondly, Toby, as the VCM sees increasing carbon insurance offerings and some criticism of the buffer pools, how is Verra adapting and refining its risk management mechanisms?
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, participants. Those are great questions. And close to our hearts, things we've been working on for a long time. As probably most of you know, Verra pioneered the development and application of the buffer approach back probably about 18 plus years ago. And since we launched that approach, we have been continuously refining it, improving, tightening the risk ratings, how we assess projects, and how we increase integrity through monitoring. And those have been kind of steady improvements over the years with the expectation and hope that we ensure 100-year permanence for nature-based projects. Having said that, there's always room for improvement or tightenings with new technologies and other ways we can track and provide more confidence to the permanence of the credits that are issued. And one innovation and new development that we launched about a year ago or established was the long-term monitoring system which is in its mid-phase of use. And that's a system where we basically use remote sense data to track all existing nature-based projects that are at any risk of reversal. And the system basically alerts us immediately if there is seen any losses in any project areas. We use that then to determine whether actually any net reversal has occurred. And then in the second phase of development of the long-term monitoring system, we're going to actually use machine learning and other algorithms to determine or get a sense of the actual carbon loss itself, so that we can then triangulate the numbers with what we're seeing from the projects themselves and other sources. So that's one way that we're providing more integrity and transparency through the use of new technology to get to that 100-year goal. Having said that, we do recognize that there has been tremendous progress with insurance over recent years, something we've been tracking and engaging for, let's say, the last decade, but really in the last 2 years is where we've seen enough uptick in developers in the insurance industry willing and able to offer products that can serve this market. So we've been engaged with, I'd say, almost 30 of the leading insurers, including all the majors and reinsurers, and working both in consortiums and individually to see what could be done for individual project insurance and potentially buffer insurance. Our current thinking is that there is a lot of potential for us to think about industry-led solutions for permanence, and that might be a way to very tightly assess the risk of projects and start to use capital more efficiently through through markets, based on actual risk ratings or insurance offerings that the industry provides. So it's definitely an exciting area and something that we're going to be looking to see how we can embed it into our system to provide further assurance into the long-term permanence of our projects.
Okay, Toby, thank you for that. And don't go far because I'm already seeing your name on some future questions. So thank you. The second question is for Naomi. So Naomi, if you could join me again. How are previous monitoring periods going to switch for VM48, where there isn't risk maps or activity data available for past monitoring periods?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So this is a question that's sort of bridging Justin's update and mine. So if I'm understanding it correctly, that is, the question is really about Justin's update and how you might be able to reassess historical vintages such that they could be CCP eligible. So number one, I would say we still need the approvals from ICVCM on VM48. That will hopefully be coming in coming months. And the way that will work is that for these first jurisdictions, for each jurisdiction, the dates of the baseline validity periods that we are publishing do depend on the jurisdiction, and they were set based on when projects in those places were due for baseline update or other critical factors that were locally relevant. And so in many cases, particularly in these first phase jurisdictions where most of our projects lie, we're actually putting out the first baseline validity period that starts, depending on the country, around 2019, 2020, 2021. So it depends on the country, but where the data is available, you'll be able to go back as far as that baseline validity data is available. So several years in many cases, but it will depend on the jurisdiction.
Naomi, thank you. All right, Toby, this one's a fun one. So for whoever asked it, they get 5 karma points. Would love to hear more details and timeline about the new nature framework. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Happy to provide an update. Yeah, it is an exciting framework and something that's really important. Basically, for those of you who don't know, we've been working for, let's see, probably almost 2 years now on the Sustainable Development Verified Impact Standard nature framework with the leading NGOs, practitioners, and scientists in other space to develop a world's leading framework for assessing the biodiversity impacts of projects, no matter what kind of project type they are, whether it's terrestrial ecosystems, ocean, or otherwise. And we've been making great progress with that. Some of you have seen probably the public consultations around it. We're on track for launching our next iteration of the draft framework that can be used for extended piloting later this year. We have about 50 pilots that are going to be using the framework. We had an application pool of over 200, so tremendous interest in using the framework. as a way of robustly accounting for and verifying the biodiversity benefits for different project interventions. And those could be used either on a standalone basis, so a project that just wants to show its uplift in biodiversity from a given intervention, and to be able to quantify that so that it can attract investment and other interest and potential claims around that. And also it'll be a really useful framework for existing nature-based projects in the carbon space that are looking for additional value streams or want to better quantify the nature and biodiversity benefits that the projects are delivering. So we see this as really helping both, projects or the space in general, but also providing a really helpful additional extra value stream for carbon projects that are doing great work in terms of biodiversity conservation. In the longer term, after the initial launch this year, and we'll get see pilots start to test the framework, and we can make fine tuning based on that. We'll then start to add more modules on the framework that will allow different use cases and different applications. And then over time, we'll have more granular approaches to assess different dimensions of biodiversity. So all in all, a super powerful framework that's taking shape, and we'll start to see the first elements of that coming out later this year.
Wonderful, thank you. Just a quick time check, we've got 8 more minutes, so please keep the questions coming. This next question is going back to Naomi. Let's talk about Peru a little bit. Given that Peru has nationally set forest project baselines for Amazonian deforestation, how will Verra's VM48 and VMD55 baselines for the first phase activity data cohere to that?
Yeah, so we have taken, we have been working to engage directly with governments around the world wherever we can in this process. And our hope is in the long run, we're able to really strive towards harmonized data sets. In this round, we needed to act urgently to be able to shift the market to the new framework. So we have led the way of collecting what we needed that would meet our requirements. But in the case of Peru and in a couple of other cases, we have been able to do that coordination from the very beginning. So actually, in the case of Peru, we are using their national data set. So that is one of the cases where we won't have any discrepancy at all.
Okay, great. And Naomi, before you go away, I've got one more for you. What is the status of JNR methodology meeting CCPs?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one I can't entirely answer because that process is still ongoing. But in the discussion around JNR, where there were identified a few small tweaks that needed to be updated to make sure that it fully met the CCPs. So we are in the process, as I mentioned, of releasing those updates, and they should be coming just in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll be waiting for the final review and sign off process, which I noticed that Justin came on the screen. Maybe he can say more about that overall piece. So I don't know when the information and the final decision will be made and published, but we are making sure that those updates are completed that are needed to make sure it fully complies with the CCPs.
Okay. This is actually a good segue over to Justin, and I have a question for both Justin and Ian. Can you talk a little bit about permanence in the CCS?
Yeah, maybe just before we jump there, just to build on Naomi's answer. So the assessment status for any methodology under the ICVCM can be viewed on the ICVCM website, and that's just icvcm.org/assessment status, or type that into your search engine and it'll come up. So they do give some foreshadowing of which stage each methodology is at in the process, so you can predict a little bit based on that. Ian, I'll let you answer on the permanence of CCS.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. So the question was, what about permanence in CCS? And I think it was probably written during or after Toby's response to the non-permanence question in general. So building off what Toby said and being more specific to CCS, I would say the framework for non-permanence risk management in CCS is very similar in that it's an extension of the pre-existing non-permanence risk framework within Verra. So there's a non-permanence risk tool, there's a buffer, and though there are no projects registered and thus no credits in the buffer yet, we foresee managing risk in a very similar way. There are examples and studies and science being done and available from around the world that give us pretty good indications for what's an appropriate amount of credits to be sort of taking off a project and how to be correlating characteristics of a project with its risk of reversal. And that is been done, and it's all encapsulated in the non-permanence risk tool, which I introduced when I was speaking earlier. But it's in fact an extension of the requirements. So in a lot of ways, the requirements that we put forward in the GCS requirements document are important safeguards that prevent any projects with unfavorable characteristics around reversals to just not get credits at all and not be eligible. And then where there are elements of risk that we feel like we can tolerate, and they're not going to be sort of like catastrophic, we've included those in the non-permanence risk tool. So there's really sort of like this two-tier structure to managing the risk. Overall, I think we've probably leaned on the very conservative side in terms of the quantity of buffer that we'll be taking. And I think that's just appropriate given the early days. As we see a generation of CCS projects go through a cycle of crediting, and perhaps we have some reversals or other just mishaps within the industry, we can start to maybe calibrate and more likely than not reduce the buffer take, but that's years to come. And so sort of we're taking a very long-term approach in our thinking here. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Justin. Okay, so Naomi, according to BMD 55, this module, quote, is not applicable if the project harvests trees to generate income. In this case, how should projects that include SFMP proceed?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So as I mentioned, we are releasing updates to VMD 55 very soon, and that involves both updates for ICVCM and to include provisions for how to account for those forest management activities. And just to say this, I think there was another question related to those. You know, there are cases where it makes sense to have management activities in part of the project that are an important strategy for the overall protection of the area and management of those areas. So we are incorporating methodological specificity for how you would account for that in the update. So in just a couple of weeks, you should see that go out for public consultation, and we absolutely welcome all the feedback on making sure that that's done appropriately.
Naomi, thank you so much. That is going to bring us to time, our allotted time today. I'd like to thank everyone for participating and every stakeholder that has called into this call. Just as a reminder, we welcome all feedback in our stakeholder survey, which has gone out in our July newsletter. Please, as Jude said earlier, we read every single line and your feedback is invaluable. So we are beyond thankful for everyone taking the hour today to join us. Our next stakeholder update webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, October 23rd. The registration is already available at verra.org/events, and we hope to see you there. And again, thank you everyone for joining us on this call today.